Tim, thank you so much for allowing us to come interview you. We've worked together for a number of years with the IGFA as board members, trustees. And I've always wanted to talk to you about your life in fishing because it's been so spectacular and more in the offshore world, the billfish world. And before we get going here, I just want to just say a couple things about your acclaim and how important you've been to this world of the offshore billfish world. You were one of the very first guys to influence the rest of the world to use circle hooks. You're the co-founder and first director of the Billfish Foundation, and that mission was to validate recreational contributions to tourism, pointing out the high value of sport fishing over commercial harvest. You're awarded the prestigious Frank Johnson Trophy for personal achievement in the advancement of big game sport fishing by Guy Harvey Outpost. You received the IGFA Conservation Award for your key role in the passage of the Billfish Conservation Act of 2012, which outlawed the commercial sale of marlin and sailfish in the continental United States. And this is just part of it.
Yes, but none of that measures my enjoyment of bill fishing, which is...
I know, we're going to get there. But here, too, you served as the chairman of Wild Oceans, the oldest saltwater fishing group in the United States. And in 2016, you were inducted into the IGFA Fishing Hall of Fame. And Guy Harvey says, every marlin fishing angler today owes a great debt of gratitude to Tim Choate for his tireless work to protect billfish from irresponsible fishing practices. It's like, wow. What do you think when I read all this and your big life in fishing and all the great acknowledgments that you've received from everybody around the world?
Well, it's very nice of you to mention all that, but I've just enjoyed doing what I've enjoyed doing, and bill fishing is my highest enjoyment.
And you did it for a long time. But I think what's really impressive is that you're so humble and modest. So you were just doing this because you knew it was the right thing to do all along, you know? Let's back up just a little bit. And since I made this big statement about who you are in this great world, what was the greatest day in your life bill fishing?
There's no room for doubt there. The greatest day of my life was the last day of a fishing trip with my daughter to Australia in search of a world record black marlin for her on 50-pound test. And when we finally caught it on the 7th day of a 7-day trip, it was the highest joy of my entire life and something that I will never, ever forget. But that was my greatest day of fishing, to see her wind that fish in and to see everything go as a plan and come to fruition the way it did.
Well, here too, that fish was just not a normal fish. This was an 11-pound blue marlin, black marlin, fishing with Lori Wright on the Great Barrier Reef.
That was. And Captain Ross Finlayson on his boat. Yes.
When that fish came in the teasers, did you know right away it was over $1,000?
I was the only one that happened to be looking at the bait at the time, and the fish came over, and it was several seconds between the time of the bill and then the dorsal and then finally the tail. And by the time that all had happened, I said, "He's coming in the boat." I knew right away, but it was over the 950-pound limit that we were sort of putting on ourselves.
But so it broke a pretty big, it broke the previous record by a lot.
It did.
Yeah.
Does that record still stand?
It still stands, and I think I don't know. I'm certainly going to be gone, and I would suspect Stephanie will be too by the time somebody beats that.
Yeah, that's a very high ceiling that you guys put up there. But let's go back to when you introduced Steffi, to fishing. I mean, your daughter has had an amazing life in fishing. She's won big tournaments where they won $400,000. She's caught a couple granders, if I'm not mistaken. So her life in fishing might even be bigger than yours without the awards.
Oh, I think she's definitely won more money. That's for certain. She's won the World Cup, and I think collected $1 million on that one.
Yeah.
But then she had another one where she won the all the money in the World Cup the following year, and that was only because the winning fish didn't have any money in the big pot, and she did. So it was all for her.
Good for her. Do you remember thinking, I hope she likes fishing when she was a little girl?
Oh, I was hoping. I had my fingers crossed. She and her brother used to go fishing when they were 7 and younger. And we'd go to Costa Rica and Guatemala and fish as often as we could. But the one thing that I learned is that you don't want to push the juniors. You don't want to push them. And that was something I never did. But she grew into loving fishing, and I've never been more thankful for that.
Yeah. Was your son a fisherman, or he just didn't like it as much?
He didn't have as much of a chance, but he's chosen a different path. But he still goes fishing, and he still loves it.
Yeah.
He was jealous of his sister, probably.
He probably was.
Well, now that we're on, your daughter being such a great bill fisherman, how can a woman like your daughter outfish men? I mean, is there a technique or a tactic that women can actually, catch these giants as well as men?
Oh, I think rather than being something of pure strength, it's something of balance and using your muscles as a method of getting the fish close. And then, it's up to them, and they have a better passion for it than men do, I think, in a lot of situations. But they have certainly no less desire than I ever did, but they certainly have a lot more abilities than I ever did in using their God-given abilities to use a rod and reel.
Is that what you call touch and feel?
Oh, clearly that, yes.
Because I know your good friend, Deborah Donaway, she caught a lot of light tackle world records, 6-pound stuff.
Indeed.
And that all has to do with, I think, feel, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
And probably a really good captain, right?
Oh, the crew you can't do without a great crew. That's for sure.
Well, you started, from what I understand, you grew up in Islamorada, and you had, I think, Cecil Keith and Bucky Stark as your mentors.
A couple of them, yes.
Yeah. Who else was it that you learned from down there?
Oh, Dick Williams was another one. We used to stay at the Coral Cove Resort in Islamorada, and the Williams family were the owners and operators of Coral Cove, and Dick was a bone fisherman as well, and he was a great teacher as well. Mm-hmm. But Buck was beyond just a simple mentor. He was a teacher of life and of fishing together. And he was the main man that I learned most everything from. And I will never forget him.
What, is he the same Bucky Stark that has that little wheel ditch behind Robbie's?
Yes,
Did he start that?
He did indeed.
And how did that come about?
That was because he used it so often that everybody referred to that strip of water as Bucky's Channel. And that was the way it got known.
So back in the day, it was kind of like a shallow flat, but there was an
inland
deeper
waterway that cut a lot of time off of going from
all the way around that flat.
Islamorada all the way south. Yes.
Right. But back in the day, those mangrove shoots were just like not very high, right?
Right.
Well, today that ditch is like maybe 8 to 10 feet deep. And those mangrove shoots, they're now trees.
They're like 20 feet tall.
Yeah. It's crazy, but I always heard about him.
Yeah.
What was your fishing like back then?
Oh, it was wonderful. To my way of thinking, to my recollection, there was a lot more bonefish, there were a lot more tarpon, there was a lot more permit even on the flats. And I learned a lot from Buck, who was one of the main captains, along with Dick Williams, and they both honored the God-given ability to turn a fish back to the water, and very, very, very rarely took one out of the water to take pictures or show off. And they were probably the classic teachers of conservation, to my way of thinking.
How old were you at the time?
Oh, I started at, I remember, age 7, 8, and I never quit. So it was a wonderful, wonderful youngster's life on the Florida Flats, along with the great likes of Bucky and Dick and everybody else that had a nickel's worth of help in raising me on the water.
So you grew up bone fishing and shallow water flats fishing. How did the marlin fishing come into play? When did you catch your first marlin? Who introduced you to the big blue world?
Well, there was a Colonel Howard that was a teacher or a offshore fisherman out of just slightly north in Islamorada, and he was probably the first of the offshore people that I went fishing with. He was a great beginner. But Buck Stark had the boat called the Walter A. Stark initials, and he was the guy that really took me day in and day out offshore fishing for sailfish. And that to me was a more brilliant start than anybody could ever have gotten. And I loved it just as much as fishing even now today, but it was primarily with sailfish. And later he became the takeover man. We went to many different foreign countries together, as well as over to the Bahamas, and caught lots of blue marlin along the way. And that was essentially the start of it.
Did you enjoy the offshore chaos more than hunting bonefish and shallow water, species?
Well, it was a different go, and I don't know that I enjoyed one much more than the other,
right.
But it grew on me. And finally, I think in my teenage years, I would rather go bone fishing only slightly less than going bill fishing. And bill fishing is where I ended up.
Right. Tell me about the when you first realized that, wow, I really want to do this for a long time. Like, did you always just have this great passion and you just slowly gravitated to the offshore? Or was there anything about fishing that really affected you in that special way, knowing that I really love this. I want to do it and I can't get enough of it.
I remember being a youngster and chasing my first sailfish. And it wasn't as easy as simply nowadays going to Guatemala and having a million chances. It was going day after day after day off of Islamorada. And finally, when that first sailfish was technically and totally caught, according to the rules and regulations, it was one of my greatest joys as a kid being responsible for that catch. And that was what ignited my passion for the pursuit of billfish.
I know there was a time where you were a lawyer, right?
Oh, yes.
So
yes.
How did you go about balancing your on-land work as a lawyer to the offshore stuff? And what kind of a lawyer were you? And how long and what happened when all of a sudden you realized, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. I want to be offshore. Do you remember that?
I remember that, yes. I I went to law school after going through the University of Miami for 4 years, and finally was asked by a professor, or told by a professor, that was the kind of answer, because I hadn't done my homework very well, that was the kind of answer that I was going to be able to give in law school, but it was too early to give it in undergraduate to him. So it sounded like the way to go for me, and I went to law school. And I made it through law school, and I got into an internship working for Janet Reno in the state attorney's office, and worked there for several years, and enjoyed it very much. It was great telling a dozen people that black was white and white was black and vice versa. And it was a challenge. And after a while, I became not bored, but I had maxed out my pleasure of working with juries and judges, and decided that I really had a bigger passion for offshore fishing. So I ended up in a private law practice that, and I also became owner of a boat company in Lauderdale. And I found myself motoring to Lauderdale every day rather than motoring to my law practice in Coral Gables. And that's where I finally had to make a decision on what I wanted to do, and I did. And I would rather work in a boatyard working with seafaring people rather than with attorneys in a court of law.
Yeah, good for you. Where did you finally get your own boat? Were you like a deckhand for a long time? I mean, how did you make that transition from lawyer to being a captain? Like, who taught you the waters and where to go and how to do all this stuff?
Boy, that's a specific question lost in history, because I had done it so much that running a boat and docking a boat and playing with a boat and using a boat as a capturing machine to catch fish was a second nature thing that I learned along the way without a particular lesson or course.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember how you started to figure out where to go in Islamorada to catch sailfish, and where you traveled, where everybody else was going? What kind of communication did you have with the other captains that were maybe more successful at the time, and they try to help you learn the waters, learn where to go and how to catch these sailfish?
All the while I was growing up, I had the good fortune to be able to go fishing with so many other captains and professional crew members that it just sort of became secondhand knowledge that there's where you ought to go on this kind of a day, and there's where you ought to go on another kind of day.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just practice, and the procedures were normal and natural.
Right. When did you first start traveling to catch marlin and go to other, fishing grounds around the world?
Well, one of the few things that I learned earlier than most, I think, or at least had the good fortune to be able to follow, was that you had to follow the fish wherever they were, and you had to go to where the fish lived. And I found that all along the way that there were lots of other hot spots, including Australia for black marlin and the Bahamas for blue marlin, and that other spots had a lot more offshore fish of a particular species than did Miami or Islamorada, only because that's where they concentrated themselves. So there again, by good fortune of being able to be lucky enough to go to these places, I learned where the fish were at certain times of years and where to go in order to catch them.
Right. Were you a big world record chaser?
No, world's records to me were never a passion of mine.
Because of the killing of the marlin, of the billfish?
That's one of the reasons I think that I never pursued catching world record billfish, is because it required killing a fish.
Right.
And I thought I'd rather just enjoy the capture and release rather than taking them in and killing them and hanging them and taking pictures and weighing and measuring them.
So how did Stephanie, your daughter, all of a sudden dive in head first for winning tournaments and catching world records and really like leading that charge? Like, here's this redheaded woman that had a lot of fire, and she was taking down a lot of captains and other boats out there in the world.
Well, I hate to put it this way, but she could probably tell you better than I. But in any case, she followed a path that led her to go chase a record, and she knows the primary differences between release and world records.
Right.
She knows that because she's done it.
Yeah.
And God bless her, she knows the exact differences of the practices and the procedures involved in the pursuit of a record and the pursuit of a general release.
Yeah. What were you thinking when you saw all this going down?
Oh, I was all for her because it evoked a passion in her that really did show off her passion for chasing big fish and lots of them.
Yeah.
And that was what excited me.
Where was the first destination you went to? You say you were following the Marlin. Where was the first destination that you went to where your eyes were blown wide apart, like, oh my God, this is the Holy Grail?
Ooh.
Where was that?
Well, I can certainly remember being part of Stryker Aluminum Yacht's efforts to chase sailfish out of Cozumel and out of Isla Mujeres. But that was, again, mostly sailfish, but there were a lot more marlin down there than there were anywhere else.
Right.
But beyond that, as a youngster, I remember hearing stories about faraway places that had a huge population of either blue marlin or striped marlin or spearfish or white marlin. And those are the places that I opted to try to go fishing at.
Mm-hmm. When did you first have your mind completely blown apart about blue marlin, giant blue marlin? You know, you say the best day of your life was fishing with your daughter, catching that grander, but well before then you caught big fish. Do you remember when all of a sudden the transition from sailfish to big blue marlin might have been like, wow, I want to catch these big things?
I'm not sure that I had an awakening where I said to myself, well, we just got to go give up sailfish and go after blue marlin. I do remember catching blue marlin along the way while I was sail fishing, and those were always the high points of the day or the high point fish. And then in tournaments, blue marlin were always more valuable because they were rarer and harder to catch.
Right.
But I think the pursuit of blue marlin and black marlin came slowly along the path without a great passion awakening where I had to go catch marlin rather than sailfish.
Let me ask you this. What did you like better, black marlin or blue marlin? And describe the different characteristics of a blue marlin and a black marlin, if you will.
Well, the big story that I always paid attention to was that blue marlin did grow bigger than black marlin, but that if you wanted to make a habit of catching the biggest marlin, you better go chase a black marlin. So I opted to go to Australia quite a bit rather than just pursuing a giant blue marlin. But I can remember seeing commercially caught blue marlin, which were much bigger than the world record black marlin. But I figured that catching them would be easier if there were more of them and there were more large black marlin. So that's the fish that I pursued in hopes of catching 1,000-pounder.
Right.
But talk to me about the different characteristics of like a blue versus a black coming into the teaser. I mean, is it blue bite much more aggressively than a black marlin? Fighting wise, is one much more, dogs you much more? I don't know.
Well,
I've never caught them, so
you can certainly see every kind of bite by both species. A very aggressive bite can be put on just as readily as by a blue marlin as a great big giant black marlin bite with a high level of aggressiveness. They both can be very aggressive or very, very slow in it and very sneaky. So they both can do both kinds of things. But
when you
seeing a marlin bite doesn't make any difference to me if it's black or blue.
when you stick a hook in their face, I can't even imagine what a 1,000-pound fish looks like when you get tight.
Watching a long-taking black marlin bite, such as my daughter's black marlin bite, was one of the most beautiful things in the world because it did take several seconds, and I happened to be watching directly at that bait at the moment it bit. And that swelled up enough energy in my head that I yelled, "He's got to be in the boat." So that
meaning he's a record.
Yes,
he's coming home. He's going to go for a boat ride.
Yes, get the gaffs.
Yeah. Tom Evans used to always call it, we're going to give this fish a boat ride.
How many granders have you caught?
Over a dozen black marlin and 2 blue marlin that I know of.
Now, are those weighed or is that caught and
released? The black marlin I've weighed, I think, probably 5 or 6, and various and different stories according to why in certain cases there. But the blue marlin both came up dead. One came up dead and one I have released.
Right.
Is that tail wrapped?
Yes.
So they come up backwards. Yes. Yeah. Tell me about the Great Barrier Reef, especially with Peter Wright. I mean, he's regarded as like the Steve Huff of the offshore world, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Well, he's an icon to the sport of offshore fishing, and
like the ultimate guy.
He would be the ultimate icon for offshore fishing. Yes, I owe him immense amounts. His ability to show and teach were critical, and he did a lot for me. Mm-hmm. So I have always held him in the highest regard because of what he was able to do in teaching me how to marlin fish.
What were those things that made you as good as you were as a marlin fisherman that he taught you? Do you remember?
He used to call me and tell me that I was the best non-paid mate that he ever had. But in any case, he did lots of things, sharing secrets, sharing stories, and telling me things of how, and showing me just basic use of the chair and basic use of your feet and your rod. And there were immense numbers of things that were the reasons for them were obvious, but then again, the next time he'd show you a different thing or a different reason why something else that was not so obvious was of prime importance.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It's like, so I was just speaking with Ed Jarowski the other day, and he said, I read this article where somebody was saying, when you make a fly cast, you have to come up in the back cast and drift up and come down always. And in fly fishing, there's nothing that's constant. You've got to wiggle in all directions, backhand, underhand, forehand, into the wind, hooking the fly. And I can imagine
every cast is different.
Yeah, and I can only imagine that with the offshore world, with 1,000-pound fish, it's got to be just a 1,000 million pieces that have to be polished to be great at it.
One of the most enjoyable events is to have a bait on a flat line with a marlin chasing it and interested in it. And if he doesn't bite right away, the things that you must do in order to get a marlin to be aggressive enough to finally feed. And that to me is the kind of thing that I've always enjoyed about marlin fishing more than anything else, is because you get to practice so many little tricks of the trade to get a bite out of a marlin, no matter what kind.
So you're talking about trying to force feed a big fish that doesn't want to bite.
Yes. Intriguing them enough to get them to act in an aggressive way, whether it turns out to be an act of hunger or an act of aggression. Either way, you can do different things to cause a black marlin or a blue marlin or a striped marlin to be aggressive enough to attack the bait.
What kind of bait would you typically have on a flat line where that fish would come up and just look and not be sure whether or not he would eat it?
I'm sure it depends on where you're fishing.
Well, I'm just as an example in the Barrier Reef.
On the Barrier Reef, you could have everything from a 40-pound bait to a ballyhoo. But they would all enjoy different things you could do with them in order to get the fish to go after it.
Right.
But blue marlin and striped marlin are probably the more easily handled because the baits are usually smaller. from mackerel to ballyhoo.
I can't imagine having a 40-pound tuna as a bait.
There's not much you could do other than fore and aft.
I mean, it's like catching, it's like just having a 40-pound bait on your rig is like, oh my God, I got a big one on, you know?
Yes.
What's the trick of feeding a big fish a 40-pound bait?
It's largely contingent upon how well the bait is swimming or how well the bait bounces, because it's a lot easier to handle when it bounces rather than is down underwater swimming. So your abilities are limited when you have a bigger bait. That's for sure.
Interesting. Why was Peter Wright so good? They say he caught 75 granders, but he caught probably that many more that were released.
Oh, I'd say he caught a lot more than that, but he caught 5 in a day, I think.
Granders?
Yes, or 4 in a day. In 1 day.
4 granders in a day.
Yes.
Why was he so much better? What did he do differently?
He experimented more than most, and he fished more than most as well. So I would give him history as being his best teacher and showing him the better ways to do things.
Right. What's your most important, most valuable tip or lesson you ever got as a marlin angler?
Make sure you get on the boat.
With Peter Wright.
If you could do it all over again, I'd make sure you could do it that way. But nowadays, just pick the best person that you think has got more of a chance and to fish with them and to watch them work and to listen to them.
Did you have a favorite place to fish? Was the Great Barrier Reef your favorite place?
For black marlin. But
what about for big blue marlin?
Cabo Verde would probably be my best for blue marlin nowadays, yes.
That's Cape Verde?
Cape Verde, yeah.
So more big fish are caught out of there than anywhere else?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Did you fish Panama when Terry Andrews and Mike, established that location down there?
I fished it well before they even got into to Panama.
What was that like?
That was
the Hannibal Bank and the Zangray.
As a small angler, I was leading the annual tournament that was held from the club down there, and I was in line to win the Golden Cadillac, which was the gift that was given to the club's guest who put up the most points. I think I'd had a very, very good week when the sailfish were just everywhere, as well as the marlin. And I was there with Buck Stark, who showed me a lot about fishing when the fishing is good, which is a totally different way of fishing when the fishing is slow. But in any case, we put up some amazing points and ended up leading the tournament into the last week of the year when one of their stalwart members, who'd made 6 or 7 trips to the club, finally went back again and finally found a way to catch one more black marlin, which put him in front of me. And I was a kid and didn't deserve a Golden Cadillac anyway. So, so that was the end of that.
Yeah. Do you remember those banks, those famous banks down there?
Sure. Well, I remember fishing on them in areas they told me were banks.
Right.
And it seemed to me that every time you went over the bank, that's where the marlin would bite.
Yeah. Do you remember, the Huffenagel knot, correct? Or do you?
I couldn't tell you by names. So I've tied so many of them that it's so make your head spin.
It's so interesting that the Huffenagel is used in fly fishing, where you can connect a light monofilament, like 16-pound test, to 80-pound test. So you tie a bimini twist, a figure 8, and then you do five half hitches, and then do a risotto nut on top of that.
Right.
So the story is, Steve Huff invented this knot, fishing with Tom Evans, and they were fishing Panama. and they were running way out to the bank every day and coming back, along the same area. And they'd go all the way out, catch one fish, come all the way back, but they were not catching any fish in between. But so Tom, or actually Steve, was trying to figure out how to connect these leaders. And while they were running, it was down there, then he was running. Every time they passed a certain area, they would get a bite, but they would go further. And Steve would say, "Why don't we just stay right here, fish right here?" And they started fishing there. But that's when he figured out that knot. But that doesn't mean anything. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, where are you going with that?
I just got stuck on that. So let's make sure you edit that out. Okay.
You just really wanted to tell the story of how that knot came to be. Didn't you?
It doesn't make any. It was down there on Hannibal Bank anyway. What I'm interested in is, how did you figure out what a circle hook was and the value of the circle hook and that progression?
Well, I'm going to have to share with you a story that shifts the real credit where it should go, and that was to the original person. Peter Wright came to me back in the time the circle hook was a tool used in catching. He was using it to catch tunas. And he came down and he showed me a pack of these things, and he said, "Take a look at this." And I looked at it and I said, "Boy, that'd be great. You couldn't hurt yourself in a barrel full of them." But in any case, he said, "What do you think about using them on sailfish or billfish?" I said, "Good grief, it certainly doesn't look like it would work. Let's give it a crack." And so we got a couple of people together and went down to Guatemala, where there were enough fish where you could really get a reading on it. And we tried fishing with them in the way that a traditional J-hook was put into a bait, and didn't have a huge rate of success with that. And then we finally put one on the forehead. Captain Bud Gramer put one on the forehead of a ballyhoo. And I think I was the first one to ever catch a sailfish purposefully with a circle hook on that kind of a style.
You were.
And I loved it. And I said, "This is the way to go." And we caught several more. But that was all a way of answering Peter Wright's question as to, do you think this would work on billfish? And from what we saw in the initial go down in Guatemala, circle hooks were the best wedding between billfish and a hook style that I've ever seen. And it became de rigueur after that forever. The tournaments that we had in Guatemala used to be good for well over 1,000 fish on a 2-day tournament anyway. And whereas we used to see sailfish floating belly up after a tournament using J-hooks, we now didn't see the first one. And we decided that this was good for the well-being of sailfish. We brought Eric Prince down, who was working in Southeast Fisheries, to do a federal study. And he came away absolutely incredibly impressed with circle hooks, and decided that they should be used in federal regulations, and thereafter did his best to get them put into federal regulations, which they did. But we believed them. All the captains down there believed in what they saw as being the results, and immediately switched over and fished nothing but circle hooks. And so I was happy as a clam could be.
How did Peter Wright get a circle hook in his hand?
He had used them. They'd been used ever since the earliest residents of the South Pacific,
right,
for centuries.
Right, because you see those wooden sculptures, and they're all kind of looks like a circle
exactly.
hook. Yeah, interesting.
And then as they got more modernized, Peter used them because they had a better way of hooking up on tunas. And he believed in them incredibly strongly.
So how would you bait with a J hook for tuna? You got a J hook. How would that hook? How would you bait that?
Sewing them on the forehead, I think, and then also
with the J hook
through the lips. Oh, the J hook.
Yeah.
There were several. There's many ways to rig a tuna with a J hook.
Are you talking about rigging tuna? Or
well, I was just talking about
rigging a bait for tuna.
Well, I was looking. Well, obviously the circle hook was baited on their forehead, right? So before that, when they were using J hooks, how was that J hook applied to the bait?
Well, either you could put it in the belly, or you could put it as a lead in front of the head of the tuna, or you could put it through his lips. There were many different ways.
Right. But the problem was the fish were swallowing these J hooks.
Yes, swallowing the J hooks and then allowing, with a long drop back, allowing the fish to ingest the bait, and then they'd end up being hooked internally in one of their internal organs, or in their gills, or in some other highly sensitive organ.
Right.
So when you were fishing with J hooks, I know sailfish like throw up their stomachs, correct?
Right.
So if they swallowed that J hook and they throw up their stomach, you're hooked to their organs or guts that are way out of their mouth, right?
That can be the case, yes.
Interesting.
But with circle hooks, that doesn't happen, correct?
No, the circle hook is 95+% certain to hook in a billfish's corner of his jaw, right in the corner of his mouth.
Right.
And that is the reason why they don't hook in the stomach, is because the point of the hook is largely pointed at the shaft of the hook and does not expose the point of the hook until the hook passes through the corner of the mouth, and then the point becomes embedded in the corner of their mouth.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you take that slide across your hand, it grabs that corner right there.
But that fish has to turn, right? Or else, if they didn't have to turn, people would be trolling circle hooks on lures, right?
Yes, it requires some fancy doing, and that's one of the worst things you can see. When a billfish comes at you, as some will rarely do, as they come at you, after they have bitten your bait with a circle hook, their mouths are pointed directly towards you. And if you try to tighten up and get the fish to get hooked, it's very difficult because they haven't made a turn.
Right.
So
There's no corner. There's no corner for that
There's no
hook to go.
corner. The bait is coming straight out of the mouth, and that's what will happen if they do open their mouth and you are trying to stick them or engage the hook.
Mm-hmm.
But on one of the other tricks of the trade would be to stomp on the floor of the boat, the deck, and cause the fish to turn off and go left or turn off and go right, rather than continue coming towards the back of the boat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do that for tarpon all the time.
Yeah, when they eat your fly, you
Right.
keep stripping, you can't get tight.
Right.
You trout strike as hard as you can just to get a connection, and then you stomp on the boat and get them to spin the other way, drop
Right.
your rod, and then kind of hang on and get tight.
Right.
If anybody's in the Great Barrier Reef trying to catch records now, are they still using J hooks, or are they banned?
No, there's a lot of people that still use J hooks. And there's some of them come up with theories that they want the J hook to hurt the fish so that they die quicker or are more susceptible to being caught close to the boat because they have run out of energy or have been injured by an internally engaged J hook.
Right.
But that, I think, is a easier way to lose them to sharks than it is to get them to come to the boat.
Right.
How bad were the sharks in the Great Barrier Reef?
Some places they're very, very bad, and I think that the sharks are now claiming, or that people are claiming, that the sharks are listening for boats going in reverse and can tell the difference between a boat going in reverse as distinguished from a fish or a boat going forward at a higher rate of speed.
They've learned. Was there a time when all of a sudden it became like frowned upon to bring a fish to the dock in Australia? When it's almost like,
No, I mean, I think it's pretty normal still today, isn't it?
Well, I think there's a lot more release going on.
Right. No, I know that.
The number of kills, I think, are to weigh or to take pictures is well short of what it used to be. Nobody is killing fish for killing's sake.
Yeah.
Right? Very rare. Thank goodness.
Right. Tell me about when you first went to Guatemala and saw the fish there and you opened fin and feathers. When you first got to Guatemala, what did you see? And how did you get there?
Getting there was fairly much like getting to Costa Rica.
But did you have any intel that there was a lot of fish in Guatemala?
Yes, I had a lot of intel. And Costa Rica, I had gone there before I went to Guatemala about 3 years later. And I went to Costa Rica, I forget the year, but it was to take advantage of being in one fishery for an entire year. I had been working on boats that would make a circle around the Bahamas and then down to South America and then over to the canal and through the canal and into the Pacific. But I was in search of finding a place where you could go and keep a boat and your equipment in bodegas year round. And Costa Rica answered that call, and we ended up moving to 2 different places in Costa Rica, which would still enable you to be there year round. And then the problem with Costa Rica was that the government was so difficult to work with in terms of conservation. They wanted to make sure their captains were happy and get their votes. So they largely let the captains continue the killing process.
The commercial captains.
They had commercial captains and commercial longliners, which they wanted to ensure were happy. And therefore, they continued to allow a very, very high death rate of commercially caught sailfish.
Longliners.
And commercial fishermen of all types and sources.
Right.
So we decided that we were going to be out of the country of Costa Rica if the government was not able within 5 years of stopping that kind of thinking. And sure enough, the Costa Rican government would not change. It did not change. We went through something called CABO, the Central American Billfish Association, and did a socioeconomic study, which was the first one done on the value of sailfish towards a industry of sport fishing. And we found out that the value was seven times more in sport fishing than it was in killing a sailfish and selling their bodies for food to different places around the universe. Mm-hmm. So we decided at the end of the 5th year to the day, we started opening Guatemala, and having gone down there and did a little beginning research, found that the numbers of fish were hugely better in Guatemala than they were in Costa Rica, and continued to put 3 boats in Guatemala. We kept 3 in Costa Rica as well, and compared the notes and found that the fishing was immensely more concentrated. The billfish were immensely more concentrated in Guatemala than they were in Costa Rica.
Right. Did the government ever shut down the commercial fishing?
Well, they've shifted them back and forth and in and out and in different ways, but they still allow a killing. There's continuing efforts to try to make sailfish into strictly a sport fishing species and not allow any killing in the industry, sport fishing or commercial. Mm-hmm. And that is going back and forth and back and forth.
Because I know Tom Evans always had a big problem with Costa Rica because he was trying to catch a 12-pound world record fish, but in order to do so, you got to bring it to the dock and give it a boat ride.
Right.
But they banned the harvest, sport fishing harvest. He couldn't kill a fish, so he couldn't fish there.
Yeah.
And it was kind of ironic because the longliners and commercial fishermen were killing all these fish, but as a sport fisherman to catch a record, you couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like weird, right?
Right.
But you were also too. Well, let's go to fin and feathers first. So I understand that you built that. You started the fin and feathers.
We started Fins and Feathers, which was the first sport fishing motel, right on the canal's edge of Lakin, so that the boats were able to roll out of your bunk and roll onto a boat and head offshore.
I know. I was there. I did a TV show there a long time ago. I couldn't believe it. But that inlet was kind of hairy.
The inlet was not finished as well as it might have been by another 75 feet when it was originally opened by folks for other political reasons. And the waters continued to swirl at the mouth of it, which made that the drifting of sand would be huge in the inlet. And that's when we decided, when it became dangerous to get in and out, we went to the marina itself.
Right.
And continued to operate boats out of there. But it was not the same as allowing people to crawl out of their cabins and go to the boats.
I remember we went out of there one day, and the wall was like, oh my God, it was like to Mars.
That's interesting because wasn't Guatemala supposed to be pretty calm?
Yeah, the offshores and stuff, but the inlet was terrible.
The inlet coming in and out when the tides, when the wind was coming in and the tide was going out, was really, really tough.
Just because that sandbar got shallow.
The inlet itself was shallow as heck.
Yeah, and you had the wind and the waves stacking the current, and we had to wait for the set to pass, and then we'd scoot out. But I was a little mountain boy. My eyeballs were like this big on how are we going to do this. I was so scared.
Yep.
But did you ever pursue and catch a bunch of those fish with fly rods? Because it became really a popular fly rod destination.
It did. We recognized that right quickly. Before we even named the hotel that we built, we called it Fins and Feathers, and it was not because the feathers were referring to
the flies,
birds or ducks, well, of which there was some good duck hunting down there, but we referred the feathers were referring to flies, and that was because the number of people that were beginning to do fly fishing. There were so many fish that people that did not have particular aspects of how they wanted to fish would go through 20-pound tests and then down to 10 and then down to 6 and some to even 4 and some even to 2. But after that, they said, well, what's next? And we'd say, well, why don't you try a fly rod? And then they'd break out the fly rod and away they'd go. And that seemed to enthuse them again, and they'd say, that's all the thing I want to do now is to go fly fishing for sailfish. Nick Smith being a fine example of fly fishing supreme.
Yeah. I think people, it's harder to fly fish, but a lot of bill fishermen I know wouldn't be able to catch a tarpon in the Keys because it's so easy.
Yeah.
I mean, I got there, it's like, a cast is literally you take the fly and all you have to do is get in the water.
Even a roll cast will work.
All you have to do is, and it was amazing. That's why it was so easy, I think, and so popular because anybody in the world could go there and catch a sailfish with a fly rod.
Well, there are some subtleties to that statement, but yes, it wasn't the most hard thing in the world.
No, I love it.
Sometimes you need some easy fish.
You know what? I was so proud to catch a sailfish on my fly rod the first time. I was just ecstatic.
Yes.
I was thinking, I got a sailfish. And I just go bragging, and all these years later, I realized that it's probably the easiest thing in the world to do. I was in St. Thomas.
Well, easy for people that have your expertise, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure. But for the most part, it wasn't bad. We were in St. Thomas on the Real Tight. You remember Jim Lambert?
Sure.
I was there, and he said, let's catch a blue marlin on a beer can. I said, what are you talking about? And we get a big 9-0 hook and put a bunch of duct tape around a beer can. We wait for this, we tease one up without a hook in it. We throw this beer can out there behind the blue marlin, drag it over. He turns around and eats his beer can.
Yeah, sure.
Oh my God, it was so crazy. Those fish are so aggressive. So you have, I think, two things that are significantly giant in your career and in your resume. One was a circle hook, but the other one was the passage of the Billfish Conservation Act of 2012, where you outlawed and banned the sale of marlin and sailfish in the United States. Do you remember how that came about?
Well, I can remember lots about it. We were concerned the Atlantic fish were prohibited from coming into the States in any capacity by other laws, the federal laws. And that was not the case on the Pacific side. And at the same time, I'd been in Central America for about 7 years trying to work with Costa Rica and the other nations to prohibit them, to get them to agree not to sell fish to the United States, because that was a central place. In Costa Rica was the central country amassing these fish to send to the United States. And we tried like hell to get Costa Rica to take a stand and not amass these fish and not send them to the States. But they would not. We couldn't get 2 countries, much less 7, to sign on to this. We employed an ambassador. We did all sorts of different things.
Why was it so hard to get these countries to sign on?
Central America is a different area that requires a different political workmanship than does the United States. So after 7 years, I said, to heck with this, let's go to the United States and try from that. And it took us about 3 years in the United States, and we finally got traction, and we got the first Billfish Conservation Act passed, and we had some problems with other federal agencies that did not sign on to this and did not supplement the law that was passed with specifics enough to make a law enforceable. So we went back to work and we got it done again, but this time passed it with the specific language that was necessary. We got we got the right signatures and we got it passed 2 years later, so that it did come into practice. The one thing that's the exception is Hawaii is left out because Hawaii has had a long history of consumption of marlin as a food. And we thought that their government would not want to join in with this, and sure, we were right. But they may come yet into the agreement to join the main body of the United States and agree not to deal with billfish in any sense, so that it won't be sold from Hawaii or consumed in Hawaii. But that's coming, not yet.
That's a big deal. Congratulations on that.
Yeah. Do you remember, how did the Billfish Foundation come about? Because you're the co-founder. Who were you co-founded with?
Well, I was in Win Rockefeller's wedding as a participant. And I was good friends with Eric Prince. And it was Eric and I who first decided that we ought to do something about the commercialization of billfish in the United States. And we got together and we decided that we ought to start something called the Billfish Foundation. And the two of us did. And we did. We passed bylaws and constitutions, etc. We got all the appropriate 501c3 passages for it. But the one thing we didn't have was any money. So we decided we better get the format done, and we got my friend Wynn Rockefeller to sign on and come in with us, and he pumped a lot of money in there, and that's the way it took off. And thereafter, he decided we needed more money, and we went after several other of his friends, and finally we had a working group that had a lot of money and a lot of influence, and we started. And I was not one of their most favorite people, so while I played president of it for the first year or so, I decided to leave. Or they decided I should leave after that. And
why were you not one of their favorite people?
Well, I was doing things differently than they wanted to see things done. So it was just a leadership proposal difference. And I'm sure I wanted to go in certain directions and they wanted to go in others, and that was the basic.
Well, tell me about Wild Oceans.
Wild Oceans was the world's, or the United States' oldest fish conservation group that there was, and that's now 55 years old, but 53 years old. That was the oldest one there was, and it was being run by a good friend of mine, Chris Weld from Boston. And they even sponsored a billfish symposium back in Hawaii back in 1982 or 83, I think. And I joined up with them, and eventually when Chris got 20 years or 30 years with running the thing, he decided he needed new blood, and he made me the president. And so we started the billfish conservation as well as any others, but also all fish conservation. And the organization has been taken over now by other groups. Co-chairman Peter Truslow is doing a great job. My daughter is also co-chairman and doing a great job. And they're smashing all sorts of new rules and regulations. They're doing a study in Hawaii about billfish larvae and doing a lot of billfish research. And as a matter of fact, the Wild Oceans was the co-sponsor of the 7th Billfish Symposium just recently held in San Diego, California. But they're doing well.
What is the stock like compared to what it once was? I mean, if you have enough regulations and you have everybody, following the rules with the circle hooks and trying to be more conscious about catch and release, you would think hypothetically, biomass might even be better than it once was.
No.
Is that true?
No.
No, the populations of most billfish are still down. But the real problem is that there is no real knowledge involved in billfish. The federal government used to do a huge job of research on billfish, including age and growth and size and age, all sorts of historical studies. The federal government somehow ran out of money because red snappers, right whales, and tunas, which is a bigger market fish, has come into the focus of the way they want to spend money, and billfish has largely fallen off. So there's no studies going on, and there's not enough knowledge of these billfish and of their habits to make any rules or regulations so that they can be protected.
Right.
There's a large fleet of unregulated boats that are not counted in commercial fisheries, but they are the ones that are largely responsible for just massacring the populations of billfish. There are no rules that pertain to these boats, and they fish in many different ways that traditionally kill innumerable billfish.
Right. I remember I was in Cabo San Lucas a long time ago, and they had a bunch of billfish hanging there. And I was wondering, I asked somebody, well, why do you kill all your billfish? You know, why don't you catch and release these things? And he said, well, we're going to catch them. We let them go. And then Venezuela or somebody down the line will kill them. Guatemala or wherever they're going to end up eventually around the other side of the world. You know, so it's like, well, if we don't kill them, somebody else is going to kill them.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
What was Ron Hamlin like? You hear all these stories about him in the old days, the Wild West days. What was he
Captain
like?
Hook.
Captain Hook. Oh boy. Well, he was another one of my professors and mentors, and he took me to all sorts of different places and really gave me my first job as a mate on a boat. And he was a magical man because he could speak fish. And he knew where the fish were going to be and how they were going to be and what they were going to be eating and innumerable factoids about the fish that we were chasing. And he was strictly a bill fisherman too. So I enjoyed my early going with Ron, and he showed me all sorts of new tricks in trade, new tricks of the trade with billfish.
Was it hard to work with him when he was on his run with drugs and alcohol?
Oh, it was amazingly difficult. You'd have to compensate and do a lot more in order to escape any kind of problems. But it was doable, and we got him out of it, and we finally got him rescued and fixed him up, cleaned him up, and he was good thereafter.
Put him back out to sea.
Yes. Yes.
I fished with him. We did a TV show together, like God, a long time ago, and he was so awesome. He was clean at the time, and everybody would call him all day long. Where are you, Cappy? Hook. Where are you?
Yeah.
Wasn't he a bowler too?
He was a bowler.
He was a bowler.
He bowled like 10 300 games, perfect games.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was a professional bowler.
He was a professional, very good, very highly ranked and highly rated bowler.
Yeah. Wow. Didn't he have polio? That's why his arm was like a little bit deformed. That's why they called him Hook.
Yeah. Yeah. That was.
Interesting.
Anybody that you would like to make mention of that really helped you along the line with conservation or in your life as a fisherman that you'd like to talk about?
My one true professor, not only of fishing but of life itself, was Buck Stark from Islamorada. And I was lucky enough to really learn how to fish and how to live by this individual. And he, to me, was the greatest person that was ever put in charge of a boat and in charge of a couple of other lives. And he raised a couple of good kids, and I came along as the third one, a layaway. And I owe my real being as a fisherman to him. And he was the greatest guy that I ever knew.
What did he teach you about life? You said he taught me about fishing and life. What was the life lesson?
He didn't have to tell you anything, but his being told you without words what to do and what not to do and how to do it and who to respect.
Where was your father at this time?
My father died, passed on. But
as a young man, he passed.
Yes.
Oh, yes. I'm so sorry. I didn't know that. What are you most proud of? I mean, my God, you're in the Hall of Fame. You started these conservation organizations that really saved a lot of fish.
Well, I've tried to do everything I could as far as it came to billfish. Not only finding ways to catch them and where to go catch them and putting marinas together, putting boats together and things of that nature, but also of trying to get the laws changed to accommodate their well-being. But I've gotten old enough now that I've run out of those kind of things to do, and now just about there was only one other last thing, and I just did that a little while ago with the IGFA, or have tried to do, and that is to start something called the Billfish Endowment, being hosted by the IGFA. And the Billfish Endowment is the aim of which is to raise money in the form of an endowment to sponsor billfish research, which will finally do the science that is needed desperately by federal agencies as well as private agencies that need to pass laws to protect the billfish. We have set off with a goal of $3 million, and the IGFA has raised almost, we're about about $90,000 short of raising $1 million to match a donated $1 million. And we have got now all but $90,000 in order to have $2 million, and we will have $3 million probably within the next 4 or 5 years.
Didn't you donate the first $1 million?
Well, yes.
To be matched.
Yes. But what we're trying to do is to raise money to keep in a fund that will not cease.
Right.
It will not be spent. The corpus of this fund will not be able to be spent. It will only be the money that grows from the $3 million
that you can spend.
And I'm also now trying to get access to some federal money, which hopefully will be able to double that fund. And I hope to be able to have $5 or $6 million in the fund by the time I get to go. So we'll find out about that.
Yeah.
But I think the Billfish Endowment, which the public is welcome to generate and give to, it's being held by the IGFA, is one of the best ways to raise money to give science a good approach to doing research into billfish.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the last thing I could think of to do. But
well, that's awesome.
I love it.
That's really great. Real quick question. Do you think this might be something that other countries might want to jump on board, and knowing that they have billfish swimming in their waters as well, and other regions of the world, to help raise these dollars for science?
Oh, I think so. And I think one of the best ways to start is for them to initially find out what they've got. And the best way to do it is through a socioeconomic study. There were only 2 studies that were actually done that showed this. One was down in Costa Rica that originally showed what the sport fishing industry was worth to the country, so that the president could thereafter use his effort and influence to pursue fish conservation. And that was, it took better part of 30, 40 years for him to finally recognize this, but it's there now. And I think their country is now beginning to recognize the value of billfish and bill fishing, such that they are protecting the billfish.
You can only imagine how much money is being brought into the infrastructure with all the marinas, the big boats, the hotels.
The
people.
Value of a dead sailfish was X, and the value of a live sailfish was 42X.
Right.
And that was
your
that
dead
was
sailfish,
a long time ago.
Your dead sailfish is going to feed a big party for one night.
Yeah. Yes.
And I would even say it might be more than that, because that sailfish is going to reproduce, and for years to come, it's just going to have a whole lineage of
the biomass grows.
But the second socioeconomic study was done in Mexico, and it was largely around one port, and it showed that this one port was largely a survivor only because of the amount of bill fishing that was done for the people that lived in Cabo San Lucas.
Yeah, that whole town is supported by bill fishermen.
And
no question.
Without the bill fishing, there would be no Cabo San Lucas.
Mm-hmm.
So
now
that
it's
was the
getting a
second
little
one.
bit more developed with golf courses
Right,
and tourism,
right.
but initially forever and ever and ever, it was all billfish.
But I think the socioeconomic study is one of the first and best ways for another country to ascertain exactly what their value is so that they'll know what to protect in terms of keeping conservation at the top of their list.
Yeah. Well, it's been a real pleasure, and it's been a real honor to know you. I mean, my Lord, as Guy Harvey said, every bill fisherman owes you a big thank you for what you've done.
Well, Andy, we all owe you a big thank you for doing the kinds of things that you do and for emceeing as many IGFA events as possible and for always speaking out on behalf of fish conservation. And I thank you for that.
Well, thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Tim, for coming on.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
Come on, buddy.
You got it.
Thank you, man.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
It's always fun to hang out with you and Deborah Dunaway and Terry Andrews at the Hall of Fame. You guys are the dinosaurs, man. All the stories and the
Dinosaurs,
fun that we've
that's
had.
a good way to put it. Yeah.
We're dinosaurs now. Well, thank you, Tim, so
Well,
much.
we got to figure out one way to last until we get some more money up for this scientific thing. But other than that, it's been fun. That's the one thing that I consider my life's best dealing is that I got myself a lot of fun along the way.
And did a lot of good, too. Thank you.
Oh, but it's been fun.
What I saw is just that story. What I saw is just a